The cage was warm because her body was burning. She knelt on stone worn smooth by 100 other bodies before her wrists circled by iron that had learned the shape of her bones. 3 days since they caught her stealing bread from the winter stores. 3 days of silence, not the peaceful kind, but the kind that screamed from inside her throat with nowhere to go. Her name was Mira, though no one called her that anymore. Omegas without voice had no names, only uses. The dungeons beneath Silver Oak Castle smelled of rust and old straw. Torchlight carved shadows across granite walls, and somewhere above boots echoed on stone. She pressed her palm against her belly, feeling the flutter beneath her ribs that only she knew about. 4 months along. The child of a royal bloodline, though no one would believe her if she could tell them. No one would care. The guard approaching her cell carried a blade that caught the torchlight, flashing with deadly promise. "Time's up, Omega," he spat, eyes cold as Montana winter. "Lord Brecken says thieves don't deserve another sunrise." The key turned in the lock with the sound of a death knell. 2 more guards flanked the first faces, impassive as they entered her cell. Mira pressed herself against the wall, one hand still protectively covering her stomach. "Stealing from the winter stores when supplies are already low," the first guard said, grabbing her arm and hauling her to her feet. "You've taken food from children's mouths." She shook her head frantically, tried to form words with her lips that wouldn't come. "A mute Omega has no value," the second guard said. "Not worth the food she eats." The third guard, younger than the others, looked away when she met his eyes. They dragged her from the cell up a narrow staircase where icy drafts curled around her ankles. The courtyard would be her execution ground. Public, a message to others. They didn't care that she carried a child, and Omega's offspring, especially a mute one's, meant nothing. Morning light blinded her as they emerged into the courtyard. Snow had fallen overnight, covering the cobblestones in pristine white that would soon be stained crimson. A small crowd had gathered despite the early hour. Castle servants, guards, a few nobility, wishing to witness justice served before breakfast. They forced her to her knees in the center of the courtyard. The guard captain, Lord Brecken, approached with a ceremonial axe, its blade gleaming in the winter sun. "For the crime of stealing from the royal stores during winter shortage, this Omega has been sentenced to death," he announced, voice carrying across the courtyard. "Let this serve as a reminder that even in times of hardship, the law of Silver Oak remains absolute." Mira closed her eyes, feeling the winter sun on her face for what would be the last time. She didn't fight. There was nowhere to run. 20 years of silence had taught her that some battles couldn't be won. The crowd's murmuring faded to a dull roar in her ears as she waited for the blade to fall. "Stop!" The voice cut through the courtyard like thunder through still air. Deep, commanding, absolute in its authority. The kind of voice that moved mountains and commanded armies. The voice of Alpha King, Dominic Silverstone. The crowd parted instantly, backs bent in automatic submission. Even Lord Brecken, the captain, who had been so eager to separate her head from her shoulders moments before, lowered the axe and dropped to one knee. "Your Majesty," he murmured, "we were carrying out justice as the law demands." Mira kept her eyes down, but she could feel the Alpha King's presence like a physical force pressing against her skin. Power radiated from him in waves that made even the bravest men step back. For 20 years she had served in his castle, always careful to remain invisible. Now she knelt before him, awaiting judgment. "Justice," King Dominic repeated, the single word carrying a weight that made Lord Brecken flinch. "Executing a starving woman is what you call justice." Footsteps approached, slow and deliberate, boots crunching on fresh snow. Then silence. She could feel him studying her, taking in her thin frame, the chains around her wrists, the way she curled protectively around her middle. "Look at me." The command slid into her mind like a key into a lock. Omega biology responded before conscious thought could intervene. She raised her eyes. King Dominic Silverstone stood before her, and the winter sun seemed to dim in his presence. At 42, he was in his prime, tall and broad-shouldered, beneath a coat of iron-gray fur, his hair the color of ash over a dead fire. But it was his eyes that held her, silver blue, luminous as moonlight on water, and drowning in something she recognized because she carried it too. Regret. His jaw tightened as he studied her. "Then release her." Lord Brecken hesitated. "Sire, she was caught." "I know what she was caught doing." The Alpha King's voice dropped an octave, carrying the subtle harmonic that made lesser alphas bare their throats. "Release her now." The chains fell away. Mira didn't run. That was what seemed to surprise him most. The guard unlocked the iron cuffs, and they fell to the snow with a muffled thud. Yet she remained on her knees, unmoving, her dark eyes fixed on some point beyond the Alpha King's shoulder. She was thin, dangerously so, her collarbone sharp enough to cut glass, her wrist marked with deep red lines where the chain had bitten into flesh. But there was something else, a luminescence beneath her skin, barely visible in the morning light. Dominic had seen this only twice before in his lifetime. The mark of the Pathfinders, those rare Omegas born with the gift of reading fate. "You can leave," he said quietly. She didn't move, didn't make a sound. He'd heard the servants whisper about her muteness, how she communicated in gestures, and the rare strangled sounds that came from a throat burned too young. "What is your name?" he asked. She looked at him, lips moving silently. "Mira." "Mira," he repeated the name, feeling strangely significant on his tongue. "You're free, Mira. You can leave this courtyard, leave the castle if you wish." She didn't accept his extended hand. Instead, her gaze traveled to his face, lingering on the scar that ran from his left temple to his jaw. A wound from the rebellion 5 years ago, when he'd chosen mercy over massacre and his own people had called him weak for it. 300 had died anyway. The ones he didn't save haunted him more than the ones he did. Her hand came up slowly. She didn't take his fingers. Instead, she touched the scar with a gentleness that made something in his chest fracture. Her fingertips traced the ridge of old tissue, and Dominic felt his breath catch. It was intimate in a way that had nothing to do with desire. It was recognition. She was reading him the way Pathfinders read the world, seeing the wound beneath the wound. When she withdrew her hand, her eyes were full of tears she couldn't shed. A guard appeared at his elbow. "Sire, there's a messenger from the Eastern Territories. The rebel encampment, they've taken Coldridge Pass." "I'll be there," Dominic said, not looking away from Mira. "See that she's given quarters in the castle. Food, clean clothes, a healer if she'll allow it." He stood, and the moment shattered like ice beneath spring sun. "You're not a prisoner anymore, Mira. Remember that. You belong here now. You belong to me." He turned to leave, but felt her hand catch the hem of his coat. He stopped, looking back. She was standing now, steadier than he would have expected. Her other hand moved in shapes he didn't understand, but her eyes spoke clearly. "Don't go," not with words, but with the same intensity that had marked her touch. "Something waits in that direction. Something that will change you." Dominic had learned long ago not to believe in fate. He believed only in choices, in consequences, in the weight of a crown, and the people it crushed. But standing there with this silent, burning woman, this Omega carrying a gift that should have been extinct, he felt the first tremor of something he'd thought himself too broken to feel. Hope, or its cousin, terror. "I have to go," he said softly, "but I'll return. I promise you that." She released his coat, and he saw her lips move one more time, shaping a single word in the cold morning air. "Hurry." The mountains of Montana had hidden the kingdom of Silver Oak for generations. While the outside world marched forward into modernity, Silver Oak remained frozen in time. A society of alphas and omegas living by the old ways, ruled by the Silverstone bloodline since before America had a name. The castle stood at the heart of a valley surrounded by pine forests and snow-capped peaks, a fortress of gray stone and ancient wood. Inside its walls, life continued much as it had for centuries. Alphas dominated positions of power. Betas served as the working backbone, and Omegas, especially unmated ones, existed at the mercy of others. Mira had been 7 years old when her village was attacked. 20 years had passed, but the memories remained razor-sharp, embedded in her flesh, like splinters that could never be removed. Flames engulfed thatched roofs. Men on horseback swept through narrow streets, cutting down anyone who ran. Her father, the village healer, had hidden her beneath the floorboards when the first screams began. "Don't make a sound," he'd whispered, his eyes wild with fear. "Whatever happens, whatever you hear, stay silent." She'd nodded, terrified, as he replaced the loose board. Through cracks in the wood, she watched as the door splintered inward. 3 men entered, led by a tall figure whose presence filled the small cabin like smoke. "Where is she?" the leader demanded. "The child with the silver mark. We know she's here." Her father stood his ground. "There's no one but me and my wife." The leader smiled, a cold expression that never reached his eyes. "Victor Ravencroft doesn't tolerate lies, healer." Victor. She would never forget that name, nor the face of the man who wore it. Aristocratic features, cold blue eyes, hair the color of burnished copper streaked with silver. A face that might have been handsome if not for the cruelty that animated it. What followed was a nightmare of screams and pleas. Her mother dragged from the back room. Her father beaten until he couldn't stand. Both questioned about the child with the mark. They revealed nothing protecting her until their final breaths. When the torture yielded no answers, Victor grew impatient. "Burn it," he ordered. "Burn everything. If the Pathfinder child is here, she'll either reveal herself or die in the flames." As his men spread oil over the cabin floors, Victor paused, head tilted, as though listening to a distant sound. He approached the loose floorboard where Mira hid, kneeling down to press his palm against the wood. "There you are," he murmured, a predator scenting prey. "I can feel you breathing, little one." The board was ripped away. Light flooded her hiding place as Victor reached down and dragged her out by her arm, studying her like a curiosity. His fingers brushed across her cheek where a faint silver luminescence glowed beneath her skin. "A Pathfinder?" he said, satisfaction coloring his voice. "The firstborn in 50 years. You'll never read the futures for the Silverstone line, child. That power belongs to those who know how to use it." He turned to one of his men. "Burn her throat. It's a mercy, really. She won't be able to tell anyone what we've done here today." The pain was beyond anything she could have imagined. The hot iron pressed against her tender throat, searing away her voice, her future, her identity. When unconsciousness finally claimed her, she welcomed the darkness. She should have died in the snow where they left her. Instead, King Silverstone's hunting party found her a broken child surrounded by the ashes of her former life. They brought her to the castle more out of curiosity than compassion. A mute Omega child had some use. She could work in the kitchens, scrub floors, carry messages. Her silence was considered an asset. She couldn't gossip, couldn't complain, couldn't reveal secrets. For 20 years, she'd lived in the shadows of Silver Oak Castle, learning to communicate with gestures, learning to read emotions in the faces of others, learning to survive in a world that considered her worthless. And now, in the strangest turn of fate, she stood in chambers fit for nobility, assigned to her by the command of the Alpha King himself. The room was high in the eastern tower, with windows that looked out over the frozen kingdom. A fire blazed in the hearth, warming air that smelled of pine and clean linen. Servants had brought hot water for bathing food that made her stomach clench with wanting, and clothes softer than any she'd worn in 20 years. Morgan, the royal healer, had attended her wounds with gentle efficiency. An old woman with eyes the color of parchment and hands that trembled with age or power or both, Morgan had served 3 kings before Dominic's father. "There," Morgan said, finishing the bandage on Mira's wrist. "The king ordered your care, and care you shall have." Her ancient eyes studied Mira with uncomfortable intensity. "You're carrying a child." Mira froze, hand instinctively moving to protect her belly. "Don't worry, child. I've kept secrets for nearly 80 years. Morgan's voice lowered. "But there's something else about you, isn't there? Something that made our king take notice." Mira hesitated, then pulled back her sleeve to reveal the silver luminescence that occasionally shimmered beneath her skin. Morgan's breath caught. "Pathfinder blood," she whispered, voice tinged with awe. "I thought your kind extinct." Mira shook her head. "The gift of reading fate itself," Morgan continued. "To see what is, and what might be, to change the course of kingdoms with age." She reached out her fingers, hovering just above Mira's skin. "Does the king know what you are?" Mira nodded. "Then God help us all," Morgan said, not unkindly. "There hasn't been a Pathfinder in the royal court since the Great Purge 50 years ago. Victor Ravencroft's grandfather led that slaughter, hunting Pathfinders like deer." Her eyes narrowed. "Is that what happened to your voice, child? Were you caught in the last of those hunts?" Mira nodded again, surprised that the old woman knew of such things. "A war is coming," and Morgan said, gathering her herbs and bandages. "The signs are clear for those with eyes to see. The rebellion in the Eastern Territories, the whispers of Victor Ravencroft building an army. The king shows mercy when others demand blood, and they call him weak for it." She paused at the door. "But what they call weakness, I call wisdom. Remember that, Pathfinder. Our king may need your gift before the winter ends." After Morgan left, Mira stood at the window watching snow fall on the castle grounds. In the courtyard below, servants cleared paths while guards patrolled the walls. Beyond the castle gates, the village of Silver Oak sprawled outward, smoke rising from 100 chimneys. All of it ruled by Dominic Silverstone, the Alpha King, who had spared her life when others would have taken it without a second thought. The king who had recognized what she was when she touched his scar. The king who had looked at her with eyes that carried the same haunted regret she saw in her own reflection. She wondered what he would say when he learned about the child. Not just any child, but one of royal blood. The unborn heir carried the blood of both Silverstone and Pathfinder lineages, a combination that hadn't existed in centuries. A child who would one day walk the threads of fate itself, if the child lived that long, if any of them did. In her heart, Mira knew that Victor Ravencroft was the man behind the unrest in the Eastern Territories. The same man who had burned her voice away 20 years ago was now burning his way across the kingdom, determined to take what he believed was his by right. She turned from the window when a knock sounded at her door. A young servant entered, eyes downcast, in the presence of the king's mysterious new ward. "His Majesty requests your presence in the great hall, my lady," the girl said, voice barely above a whisper. "There's been a development in the Eastern Territories. He said you would want to hear this." Mira followed the servant through stone corridors and down spiraling staircases, feeling the weight of curious eyes as they passed guards and nobility alike. Word traveled quickly in the castle. The mute Omega kitchen girl was now under the king's protection, moved to the eastern tower dressed in fine clothes. Speculation would be rampant. The great hall of Silver Oak Castle was a cavernous space of ancient stone and massive wooden beams. Tapestries depicting hunts and battles hung from walls lit by iron chandeliers. At the far end, upon a dais of polished granite, sat a throne carved from black stone and topped with silver. It looked like a predator waiting to devour anyone who sat upon it. Dominic Silverstone stood before that throne, surrounded by his war council. Maps were spread across a massive oak table weighted down with daggers and goblets. The Alpha King had removed his heavy fur coat, revealing broad shoulders beneath a tunic of midnight blue. The scar on his face seemed more pronounced in the hall's harsh lighting. He looked up when Mira entered, and for a brief moment something softened in his expression. Then the mask of kingship returned, and he gestured for her to approach. "The rebels have taken Coldridge Pass," he told his assembled advisors, voice carrying to the rafters. "Lord Victor Ravencroft leads them as we suspected. His forces grow stronger by the day." One of the advisors, a grizzled alpha with a battle-scarred face, leaned forward. "We should strike now, sire, before they can consolidate their position. Hit them hard, make an example of them." Several others murmured agreement. Mira stood silently at the edge of the group, watching Dominic's face as he considered the advice. "And how many would die in such an attack, General Cale?" the king asked. "How many loyal soldiers lost to prove a point?" "War requires sacrifice, Your Majesty," Cale replied, unflinching. "Your father understood this. Your grandfather understood this. And both died with the weight of thousands of souls on their conscience," Dominic countered. "I will not make the same mistakes." An uncomfortable silence fell over the hall. Mira could read the thoughts in their faces, the unspoken accusation. Weak, soft, unfit to rule. The same whispers that had followed Dominic since he'd ended the last rebellion with negotiation rather than slaughter. "We will send a delegation," Dominic decided. "Offer terms." Terms, General Cale couldn't hide his disbelief. "To rebels and traitors." "To my subjects," Dominic corrected firmly. "Misguided, perhaps. Manipulated by Victor Ravencroft, certainly. But still my people." The council dispersed, many clearly unhappy with the king's decision. Only when the last of them had gone did Dominic turn to Mira, the weight of kingship slipping from his shoulders like a discarded cloak. "You warned me," he said quietly, "when I left the courtyard this morning. You knew, didn't you?" Mira nodded, then hesitantly raised her hands, forming shapes with her fingers, the sign language she had developed with other servants over the years. Dominic watched intently, brow furrowed. "I don't understand," he admitted. Mira glanced around, then moved to the map on the table. She pointed to Coldridge Pass, then made a slashing motion across her throat. "A trap," Dominic translated. "You're saying the delegation would be walking into a trap?" She nodded vigorously, relieved to be understood. "How can you know this?" he asked, then immediately shook his head. "The Pathfinder gift. You can see threads of possibility." Again she nodded. Dominic ran a hand through his ash-colored hair, studying her with new intensity. 20 years, he murmured. 20 years you've served in my castle, and I never knew what you were. A pathfinder living right under my nose. His eyes softened as they moved from her face to her throat, where the scarred tissue was partially visible above her collar. Victor Ravencroft did that to you, didn't he? He tried to destroy your gift by taking your voice. Mira swallowed hard, feeling the familiar tightness of scar tissue. She nodded once. I was told you were found in a burned village near the eastern border. One of the last atrocities of my father's reign. He called it cleansing. Dominic's voice turned bitter. Hunting pathfinders because their gift couldn't be controlled, because they could see truths that kings preferred hidden. He stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body, smell the cedar and winter rain scent that was uniquely his. Will you help me, Mira? Will you use your gift to save this kingdom from another war, to save it from men like Victor Ravencroft, who would burn children's voices to keep their secrets? His request surprised her. Kings did not ask, they commanded, especially alpha kings with all the biological authority that designation carried. Yet here stood Dominic Silverstone, the most powerful alpha in the kingdom, asking for her help as though she had a choice. Perhaps that was why, without hesitation, she reached for his hand and placed it against her cheek in the traditional gesture of an Omega, accepting an alpha's protection. His palm was warm against her skin, calloused from years of swordplay, despite his royal blood. She felt the moment he registered what she was offering, a slight tensing of his fingers, a sharp intake of breath. Thank you, he said, voice dropping to a register that resonated through her bones. A guard entered the hall, stopping short at the intimate tableau before him. Dominic didn't remove his hand from Mira's face immediately, letting the moment linger before turning to address the interruption. What is it? Morgan requests the Omega's presence, sire, the guard reported. She says it's urgent. Dominic's eyes returned to Mira's face, studying her as if memorizing each feature. Go, he said softly. We'll speak again soon. As she followed the guard from the great hall, Mira could still feel the warmth of the king's palm against her cheek. Something had changed between them in that moment, a connection formed, a promise made. She'd pledged her loyalty to a king who'd asked, rather than commanded, who'd seen her value when others saw only her silence. What would he say, she wondered, when he learned that she carried his brother's child? What would the mighty Alpha King do when he discovered that the mute Omega Pathfinder under his protection was pregnant with the next heir to the Silverstone throne? Morgan was waiting in the healing chambers, a circular room lined with shelves of herbs, tinctures, and ancient texts. The air smelled of whey and rosemary, comforting scents that couldn't quite mask Mira's apprehension as she entered. The old woman stood by a window, silhouetted against the fading afternoon light, her white hair gleaming like a halo around her weathered face. Come closer, child, Morgan said without turning. Let me look at you properly. Mira approached, watching as the ancient healer mixed herbs in a mortar, grinding them to a fine powder with practiced movements. Morgan had been at Silver Oak since before Dominic was born, her knowledge of healing arts unmatched throughout the kingdom. I know what you carry, Morgan said quietly, finally facing Mira. Not just the child, but the gift. The rarest combination in our history, Pathfinder blood and royal lineage growing together within you. Mira felt her heart stutter in her chest. Her hand instinctively moved to protect her belly, a primitive gesture as old as motherhood itself. Don't fear, child. I've kept the Silverstone secrets for nearly 80 years, and I'll keep yours. Morgan set down her mortar and approached, eyes kind but penetrating. But you must understand what this means. This child will be more powerful than any born in centuries. It will be able to walk the threads of fate with more clarity than any Pathfinder before. She gestured for Mira to sit on a nearby stool and placed weathered hands on her shoulders. The king must know, Morgan said firmly, not just about the child, but about its father. It is his right as alpha and as king. Mira shook her head frantically, eyes wide with fear. Her hands moved in rapid signs, pleading silently. I understand your fear, Morgan replied, surprising Mira by understanding her gestures. But consider this: today the king showed you mercy when others would have shown you the axe. He recognized your gift when others saw only an Omega thief. Do you truly believe he would harm you or the child? Mira hesitated, then slowly shook her head. No, she didn't believe Dominic would harm them. But would he believe the truth? Would he accept that his own brother, Nicholas Silverstone, had forced himself on a mute kitchen servant after returning drunk from a hunt? That Nicholas had laughed when she tried to fight, had mocked her silent screams. Nicholas, the charming, reckless prince who had died in the Eastern Campaign months after that night. Nicholas, whom the kingdom still mourned as a fallen hero. Morgan seemed to read her thoughts. Prince Nicholas was not the man people believed him to be, she said softly. I treated too many serving girls who crossed his path to believe the heroic tales. Mira's eyes filled with tears that wouldn't fall. Morgan squeezed her hands in sympathy. The king is not his brother, the old woman continued, nor is he his father or his grandfather. Dominic Silverstone has spent 5 years trying to rebuild what generations of his family destroyed. He deserves the truth, especially now, with Victor Ravencroft gathering forces. A knock at the door interrupted them. A young serving girl entered curtsying nervously. Morgan the king requests your presence in his study. He says it's urgent. Tell his majesty I'll be there directly, Morgan replied. When the girl had gone, she turned back to Mira. Rest here. I'll speak with the king first, prepare him. Sometimes truth needs a gentle introduction. Alone in the healing chambers, Mira paced anxiety building with each passing minute. Morgan would tell Dominic about the child, about Nicholas. What would the Alpha King do with such information? Even if he didn't blame her for carrying his brother's child, would he see it as a political liability, an embarrassment to be hidden away? Her mind raced through possibilities, seeing threads of potential futures branching outward from this moment. In some, she saw herself banished from Silver Oak, forced to raise the child alone in a world that despised them both. In others, she remained under the king's protection, but as little more than a prisoner kept for the power of her unborn child. And in a few, the faintest, most unlikely threads, she saw something else entirely. A future where the child was acknowledged, where she stood not as a servant, but as someone with value. Where Dominic looked at her the way he had in the great hall, with recognition instead of pity. The door opened and Mira turned, expecting Morgan. Instead, Dominic himself entered the room, his expression unreadable. He closed the door behind him, the soft click of the latch like thunder in the silent chamber. Morgan has told me, he said simply. Mira stood frozen, watching as he crossed the room to stand before her. Up close, she could see the fine lines around his eyes, evidence of 5 difficult years wearing the crown. His scent cedar and winter rain filled her senses, making her heart race with instincts she'd long suppressed. Is it true, he asked. The child you carry, it's Nicholas's. She nodded once, bracing for anger, for disgust, for banishment. Instead, Dominic closed his eyes briefly, a look of profound pain crossing his features. When he opened them again, they were filled not with rage, but with sorrow. I failed you, he said, the words clearly difficult for him. He was my responsibility, my brother, and I was too blind to see what he was doing under my own roof. Mira stared at him, confused by this unexpected reaction. Her hands moved automatically in the sign language she'd developed, trying to communicate that she didn't blame him. Dominic watched her gestures, brow furrowed in concentration. I want to understand you, he said. Will you teach me your signs? The request stunned her, an Alpha King asking to learn the silent language of a mute Omega servant. It was unheard of, unprecedented. Slowly she nodded. Thank you, he said. Now about the child. Morgan tells me it carries both Silverstone blood and Pathfinder gifts, a combination that hasn't existed in centuries. He began to pace, hands clasped behind his back. This changes everything, Mira. You understand that, don't you? A child with royal blood and Pathfinder abilities, Victor Ravencroft would burn the kingdom to the ground to get his hands on such power. Mira nodded again, her own fear reflected in his words. I need to think. Dominic muttered more to himself than to her. I need to plan. The rebellion, the succession, the protection of the bloodline, all of it just became infinitely more complicated. He turned to face her again, his expression grave. For now, you'll remain in the Eastern Tower. Guards will be posted day and night. No one enters without my express permission. Morgan will attend to your health. Her heart sank, just as she'd feared a prisoner, even if in comfortable quarters. Dominic must have read her expression because he approached, stopping just short of touching her. It's for protection, Mira, not punishment. I swear it on my crown and blood. She believed him despite everything. In the 5 years since he'd taken the throne, Dominic Silverstone had earned a reputation for honesty even among his detractors. If he said it was for protection, then it was. "We'll speak again tomorrow," he promised. "There's much to discuss and plans to make. For now, rest. You and the child need strength for what's coming." As he turned to leave, Mira caught his sleeve the same way she had in the courtyard that morning. When he looked back, she formed a sign she hoped he might understand, her hand over her heart, then extended toward him. "Thank you," he guessed. She nodded, releasing his sleeve. "Don't thank me yet," Dominic said grimly. "The storm that's coming will test us all. But know this." His voice dropped, becoming almost a growl. "What's mine, I protect. And you, Mira, whether you know it yet or not, are mine to protect." The possessive declaration sent a shiver through her, not of fear but of something primal and ancient, the omega within her, responding to the alpha's claim. The days that followed established a new rhythm to Mira's life. Each morning, Morgan came to check on her health and the progress of the pregnancy. Each afternoon, Dominic visited, slowly learning her sign language while sharing news of the kingdom. The rebellion in the east was growing. Victor Ravencroft had consolidated his position at Coldridge Pass, cutting off the main trade route into the eastern territories. Reports suggested he was gathering more forces, including mercenaries, from beyond the kingdom's borders. "He's planning something bigger than just another rebellion," Dominic explained one evening as they sat before the fire in Mira's chamber. "This isn't about taxes or land disputes. He wants the throne itself." Mira's hands moved in the signs. Dominic now understood. "Why now?" he translated. "Good question. Why, after 5 years of relative peace, would Victor make his move?" Dominic stared into the flames. "Morgan thinks it's because of you. That somehow he knows about the Pathfinder in the castle, about the child." The thought chilled Mira to her core. If Victor knew about her, about the baby she carried. "Don't worry," Dominic said, reading her fear. "The castle is secure. Only Morgan and I know the truth about the child's parentage and your abilities. Not even General Kale has been told." But Mira wasn't reassured. She remembered Victor Ravencroft all too well, the cold calculation in his eyes, as he ordered her village burned, the almost scientific curiosity as he examined the silver glow beneath her skin before destroying her voice. If he wanted something, he would find a way to get it. "There's something else I wanted to discuss with you," Dominic said, shifting the conversation. "The child will need protection beyond what guards and castle walls can provide." Mira tilted her head, questioning. "Legitimacy," Dominic explained. "As things stand, the child would be born a royal bastard with no claim to the throne or the protection of the Silverstone name. Vulnerable." Her hands moved in rapid signs, asking what he meant. Dominic took a deep breath. "There's a way to legitimize the child, to give it protection and standing that not even Victor could challenge." She waited, heart pounding, at the intensity in his silver blue eyes. "Marriage," he said finally. "If you were to marry into the royal family, the child would be legitimized by law and custom." Mira stared at him, disbelief written across her features. Surely he couldn't be suggesting. "Not immediately," Dominic clarified. "There would need to be preparations, political considerations. But it's the surest protection for both you and the child." Her hands flew in frantic gestures. "Who would marry a mute omega carrying another man's child?" "I would," Dominic said simply. The world seemed to stop. Mira couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The Alpha King of Silver Oak offering to marry her, a servant damaged, carrying his dead brother's illegitimate child. It was madness. Her hands signed the question she had to ask. "Why, many reasons," Dominic answered, his voice careful, controlled. "Political necessity, protection of the Silverstone bloodline, safeguarding a Pathfinder child from those who would exploit its gifts." He didn't meet her eyes as he listed these practical considerations. There was something he wasn't saying, something that made the normally forthright king choose his words with unusual care. Mira moved to kneel before him, forcing him to look at her. Her hands signed a simple question. "Just politics?" Dominic's composure slipped just slightly. "No," he admitted, "not just politics." He reached out, hesitated, then gently touched the scarred tissue of her throat. His fingers were warm against the damaged flesh, tender in a way she hadn't experienced in 20 years. "I've watched you these past weeks," he said. "Your strength, your resilience, the way you've survived horrors that would have broken lesser souls, the way you communicate without words, read people and situations with more clarity than those who have voices. His hand moved to cup her cheek, an echo of that moment in the Great Hall. I find myself thinking of you when we're apart, wondering what you're doing, what you're thinking, wondering how your signs would translate the thoughts behind your eyes. His thumb traced her cheekbone, his touch gentle but possessive. I look at you and I see what a queen should be. Not just someone who speaks eloquently, but someone who understands the language of survival. Mira remained perfectly still, scarcely breathing, as the Alpha King, the most powerful man in the kingdom, confessed to thoughts that went far beyond political calculation. I know it's too soon, Dominic said, withdrawing his hand. I know there are 1,000 reasons why this is complicated. Your history with my brother, the child you carry, the differences in our stations. I'm not asking for an answer now. I'm not even officially asking the question yet. He stood, putting distance between them. Think about it, that's all I ask. Consider the possibilities, the protection it would offer. And know that while it began as political necessity, in my mind, it has become something else entirely. After he left, Mira stood at the window for hours watching stars appear above the snow-covered mountains. The Alpha King wanted to marry her. For politics, yes, but also for reasons he could barely articulate. Reasons that had made his sense spike with something unmistakable when he touched her cheek. Desire, interest. The beginning of something that Omegas were biologically programmed to crave, but that Mira had trained herself to resist after Nicholas's attack. Could she trust it? Could she trust him? Dominic wasn't his brother, she knew that with certainty. But he was still an alpha, still ruled by instincts she couldn't fully understand. And he was king with all the power that position entailed. She placed her hand against the cold glass of the window, watching her breath fog the pain. Outside, the first bell of evening began to toll. Somewhere in the castle, servants whispered about the king's daily visits to the Eastern Tower. In the Eastern Territories, Victor Ravencroft plotted his next move. And in the frozen darkness between the castle walls and the mountains beyond, something ancient stirred. Something that had been waiting for the bloodline of Silverstone to birth a child marked by the power of the Pathfinders. The game had changed. The stakes had risen beyond kingdoms and crowns. The attack came at midnight, silent and unexpected. Mira woke to the scent of unfamiliar alpha sharp with aggression and intent. She rolled from her bed just as a dark figure lunged from the shadows, a blade gleaming in the moonlight where her throat had been moments before. Survival instincts honed by years of navigating a world that considered her disposable took over. She dodged, grabbed a heavy candlestick from the bedside table and swung it with all her strength. The metal connected with the attacker's head with a satisfying crack, sending him staggering backward. But he recovered quickly, circling her with predatory focus. The mute Omega has some fight, he sneered. Victor will be pleased. He prefers breaking spirits that resist. At Victor's name, cold fear washed through Mira. This wasn't a random attack, it was a calculated abduction. She backed toward the door, but the assassin was faster, cutting off her escape. You'll come quietly, he said, blade glinting, as he advanced. Or I'll cut the bastard from your belly and leave it for the king to find. Pure primal rage replaced fear. Mira felt something stir within her power she'd never accessed before. The silver luminescence beneath her skin brightened, spreading outward in rippling waves. The assassin's eyes widened in alarm. Pathfinder witch, he hissed, raising his blade again. The door burst open behind him. Dominic Silverstone filled the frame, naked steel in his hand, eyes blazing alpha red in the darkness. The scent of his fury filled the room. Cedar and winter rain transformed into a storm front of protective rage. Get away from her, the king growled, the alpha harmonics in his voice, so powerful that the assassin dropped to his knees involuntarily, head bowed in biological submission. Guards flooded the room, disarming and restraining the intruder. Dominic crossed to Mira, his free hand checking her for injuries with frantic urgency. Are you hurt? The baby? She shook her head, still trembling, with residual fear, and the strange power that had surged through her veins. Her hands signed that she was unharmed. Relief washed over Dominic's features, quickly replaced by cold fury as he turned to the captured assassin. Who sent you? The man remained silent, eyes downcast. Take him to the cells, Dominic ordered his guards. I'll question him personally. When they were alone, Dominic pulled Mira into his arms, his body still vibrating with protective alpha instinct. She should have been frightened, and the last time an alpha had held her this way, it had ended in violence and shame. But Dominic's embrace felt different, safe. His arms around her were strong but gentle, his scent wrapping around her like a shield. "No one touches what I'm mine," Dominic murmured against her hair, the possessive words rumbling from deep in his chest. "I knew Victor would make a move, but I didn't think he'd be bold enough to send assassins into the castle itself." Mira pulled back enough to sign her question. "How did he know to come?" "I didn't," Dominic admitted. "I couldn't sleep. I was in my study when I felt—" He paused, looking perplexed. "This will sound strange, but I felt your fear, like a cord being pulled tight in my chest. I knew you were in danger." Her eyes widened. Such a connection wasn't unheard of between compatible alpha-omega pairs, but it typically occurred only after mating bonds were established. For Dominic to sense her distress from across the castle without any prior intimate contact, it suggested a rare compatibility indeed. "You can't stay here," Dominic decided. "The Eastern Tower is too isolated, too difficult to defend. You'll move to the royal wing, to the Queen's chambers adjacent to my own. There will be guards at all times." The Queen's chambers, unused since Dominic's wife had died 5 years earlier at the start of the last rebellion. Mira signed her concern about rumors such a move would generate. "Let them talk," Dominic replied with unexpected fierceness. "Victor already knows you're important to me, or he wouldn't have sent an assassin. Pretending otherwise won't protect you now." His eyes darkened as he added, "And let the court know you belong to me. That's a message they and Victor need to hear." Important to him, the words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Mira studied his face, the scar that ran from temple to jaw, caught in moonlight, the silver blue eyes still tinged with red at the edges from alpha rage. He truly cared for her. Not just the child she carried, not just her pathfinder abilities. Her. Impulse drove her forward. She reached up, pressing her palm against his cheek as she had that first day in the courtyard. But this time she didn't just touch his scar, she let her hand drift to the back of his neck, drawing his face down toward hers. Dominic went still, his breathing shallow. "Mira," he whispered her name, a question and a plea. She answered by pressing her lips to his. The kiss was tentative at first, exploration rather than passion. But when Dominic's arms tightened around her, when he responded with carefully restrained hunger, something broke open inside Mira. 20 years of silence, of invisibility, of existing at the edges of life, all of it fell away in the heat of the Alpha King's embrace. When they separated, both breathing hard, Dominic rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that since you touched my scar in the courtyard," he confessed. "But I didn't want to frighten you. I know what Nicholas did." She silenced him with a finger against his lips, then signed firmly. "You are not your brother." "No," he agreed. "I'm not." His eyes darkened as he added, "My brother took. I protect what's mine." He stepped back reluctantly, creating space between them. "We should go. It's not safe here." The royal wing of Silver Oak Castle occupied the entire western tower, a space of luxury and privacy reserved for the ruling family. The Queen's chambers were a suite of rooms decorated in shades of silver and blue, with windows overlooking the snow-covered royal gardens. Everything about the space spoke of wealth and status far beyond anything Mira had experienced. The bed was massive, draped in furs and silks. Fireplaces warmed multiple rooms. A private bathing chamber featured a copper tub large enough for two. Books filled shelves along one wall. Histories, poetry, political treatises. "My wife rarely used these rooms," Dominic said as he showed her the space. "Our marriage was political, arranged by my father before his death. She preferred her family estate to the castle." Mira sensed old pain beneath his matter-of-fact tone. She signed a question about the former queen. "Annalise died in childbirth." Dominic replied, his voice carefully neutral. "The child as well. A son. The loss of wife and heir at the beginning of his reign. No wonder he'd spent 5 years immersed in rebuilding the kingdom, improving himself through policy rather than bloodline. No wonder the news of Mira's pregnancy had affected him so deeply." "Try to rest," Dominic said, moving toward the door that connected their chambers. "We'll talk more in the morning." But Mira caught his hand before he could leave, signing a request that surprised them both. "Stay, just until I fall asleep." Dominic hesitated, then nodded. "I'll stay." They sat before the fire, not speaking, his arm around her shoulders, as flames cast dancing shadows across the unfamiliar room. Eventually, exhaustion claimed her, and she drifted into sleep, with her head against the Alpha King's chest, his heartbeat a steady rhythm beneath her ear. She dreamed of moonlight on water, of silver threads stretching across a night sky, of a woman whose eyes glowed like stars. Pathfinder, the woman said, her voice every voice that had ever spoken truth. You stand at the crossroads of fate. They were in a forest, clearing snow falling silently around them. The woman before Mira was both young and ancient, her features shifting like water, her form composed of moonlight and shadow. Diana, Mira whispered, and was startled to hear her own voice clear, unbroken by scar tissue. In dreams, it seemed her throat remembered what it had been before Victor Ravencroft's cruelty. You know me, the goddess said, pleased. Few remember the old names in these modern times. The patron goddess of pathfinders, Mira said, reveling in the simple joy of speech. You guide those who read fate's threads. I do, Diana confirmed. And you, daughter of silence, need guidance more than most. The goddess approached starlight trailing from her fingertips. You carry my mark and royal blood within your womb, a child who will walk between worlds, who will bridge what was and what must be. Victor Ravencroft wants the child, Mira said. Victor Ravencroft fears the child, Diana corrected. As well he should. The union of Pathfinder's sight and Silverstone power will change the kingdom forever. The goddess circled Mira, studying her. Your voice was taken so that your presence could speak louder than any words. Your silence is the loudest truth this kingdom has ever heard. She reached out, touching Mira's throat with one silver finger. Light bloomed from the contact, spreading through Mira's body like warmth, like recognition. I cannot restore what was taken, Diana said, but I can give you this when you need it most. Your signs will shine with truth that all can understand. No interpreter needed, no words necessary. Mira felt the gift settle into her bones, a power both familiar and strange. The Alpha King carries his own wounds, Diana continued. Scars less visible than yours, but no less deep. Together you could heal what generations of his bloodline have broken, or you could tear the kingdom apart. How? Mira asked. How do I know which path to take? Diana smiled, and it was the smile of the moon itself, serene and knowing. Trust your gift, Pathfinder. Read the threads of what might be, and choose the one that leads not to power, but to healing. The dream faded, snow and moonlight dissolving into morning light, streaming through unfamiliar windows. Mira woke alone in the queen's bed, furs pulled up to her chin. For a moment, she thought Dominic had left sometime in the night, but then she heard his voice from the adjacent room, deep and commanding, as he spoke with guards. She sat up, her hand moving automatically to her throat. The dream had been so vivid, so real. Had the goddess truly visited her? Or was it simply her mind processing the tumultuous events of the previous day? The door to the connecting room opened, and Dominic entered. He had changed clothes since the night before now, wearing the formal attire of a king preparing to hold court, dark tunic embroidered with silver, the Silverstone crest displayed on his chest, a circlet of black iron resting on his brow. You're awake, he said, his voice warming as he crossed to her. How do you feel? Mira signed, that she was well, though confused by a strange dream. Morgan says pathfinders often receive visions during pregnancy, Dominic replied, sitting beside her on the bed. Their gift becomes magnified as they nurture new life. He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face with unexpected tenderness. The assassin talked. He confirmed what we suspected. Victor sent him to abduct you, not kill you. He wants the child. Mira's hands flew to her belly, protective. He won't get near you again. Dominic promised, his eyes hardening. I've doubled the guards' restricted access to the royal wing. No one enters without my personal approval. She signed a question about the assassin's fate. Executed at dawn, saying, Dominic answered without apology. Attempted regicide carries the ultimate penalty. Regicide, the word hung between them. The attempt hadn't just been against Mira in Dominic's wild mind, it had been against his future queen. He truly intended to make her his wife. There's more, Dominic continued. Victor has sent a message under flag of truce. He wishes to negotiate. Mira's eyes widened in surprise. I know, Dominic said grimly. After sending an assassin into my castle, he has the audacity to propose talks. But we must hear him out. The ancient codes of hospitality demand it. She signed her concern. It had to be a trap. Probably, Dominic agreed, but refusing would make me appear weak, fearful, and it gives us an opportunity to learn more about his plans, his forces. He took her hand, his thumb tracing patterns on her palm. The messenger arrives tomorrow. I want you present when I receive him. Mira stared at him in disbelief, signing rapid protests. She was an Omega mute pregnant with a bastard child, hardly the image of royal authority Victor Ravencroft would respect. Exactly, Dominic said with unexpected fierceness. I want him to see you at my side. I want him to understand that you are under my protection, that the child you carry is acknowledged by the crown. I want him to know that his attempts to intimidate have failed. She hesitated, uncertain. Being displayed before Victor's messenger seemed dangerous, provocative. Trust me, Dominic said, lifting her hand to his lips. This is about more than politics now. This is about showing the kingdom and Victor that the future Queen of Silver Oak stands with her king. His silver blue eyes burned with determination. I want Victor to see what I see, that true power isn't found in cruelty or fear, but in the strength to protect what's yours, to cherish what others would discard. Future Queen. The title still seemed impossible, a fantasy that couldn't possibly become reality. Yet here was Dominic Silverstone, the Alpha King himself, kissing her palm with reverence, his silver blue eyes intent on her face. Will you stand with me, Mira? He asked softly. Not just tomorrow, but in the days to come, will you help me build a kingdom where silence can speak as loudly as any shout, where mercy isn't mistaken for weakness? The question was larger than marriage, larger than politics. He was asking her to believe in a vision of the future that defied everything she'd known for 20 years. A future where an Omega could stand beside an Alpha as an equal, where a mute woman could be heard, where a child born of violence could become a symbol of hope. Slowly, deliberately, Mira nodded. Yes, she would stand with him. Relief washed across Dominic's features, followed by something warmer, more intimate. He leaned forward, his intention clear in his eyes. This time when their lips met, there was nothing tentative about the kiss. It was possession and promise, claim and offering all at once. When they separated, both breathing hard, Dominic rested his forehead against hers. I never expected this, he murmured. Never thought I would feel this way again after Annalise. Never believed I deserved to. His hand cradled her face, thumb brushing her cheek. You are mine now, Mira. Mine to protect, mine to cherish. And anyone who tries to take you from me will face the full wrath of the Alpha King. The possessive declaration sent a shiver through her, not of fear, but of something deeper, the primal recognition of an Alpha claiming what was his. Mira touched his face, tracing the line of his scar with gentle fingers. In that touch was understanding of guilt, carried too long of regrets, that haunted dreams of the burden of a crown that crushed as often as it elevated. A knock at the door interrupted the moment. Dominic straightened his expression, shifting from lover back to king with practiced ease. Enter, he called. General Kale appeared, his battle-scarred face grave. Forgive the intrusion, Your Majesty, but we've received another report from the eastern border. Victor's forces have doubled overnight. He's called in mercenaries from beyond the mountains. Preparing for war while offering peace talks, Dominic observed, his voice hardening. Typical Victor. There's more, Kale continued, his eyes flickering briefly to Mira before returning to his king. He's spreading rumors throughout the kingdom, about the Omega under your protection, about the child she carries. Dominic went very still. What rumors? That she bewitched you with Pathfinder magic, that the child is a monster that will destroy the Silverstone line, that you've been compromised by unnatural forces. Offrey radiated from Dominic in waves so powerful that Kale and Alpha in his own right took an instinctive step backward. Gather the council. Dominic ordered, his voice deadly calm despite the rage in his scent. Full session 1 hour, and send Morgan to attend the Lady Mira. When Kale had gone, Dominic turned back to Mira, his composure slipping just enough to reveal the depth of his anger. Victor thinks he can turn the kingdom against you with superstition and fear, he said. He underestimates how much has changed in 5 years, how much I've changed the people's understanding of what strength truly means. His eyes softened as they met hers. He also underestimates the power of what's growing between us. Some bonds run deeper than politics, deeper than blood. He took her hand, squeezing it once. Rest. Morgan will help you prepare for tomorrow. Choose something that makes you feel strong. You'll need all your courage to face Victor's messenger. He pressed a kiss to her forehead, then straightened once again the Alpha King rather than the man. Tomorrow we show Victor Ravencroft in all of Silver Oak what happens when someone threatens what belongs to me. After Dominic left, Mira remained seated on the edge of the bed, her mind racing through possibilities. Victor was building an army while simultaneously undermining her position with rumors designed to prey on the kingdom's deepest fears. He knew about the child, about her Pathfinder abilities. He was moving pieces into position for something bigger than a simple power grab. She thought of her dream, of Diana's words about trusting her gift, about reading the threads of what might be, about choosing healing over power. Closing her eyes, Mira reached for the part of herself that had always known things others couldn't see. The silver luminescence beneath her skin brightened, spreading outward as she accessed her Pathfinder abilities with conscious intent for the first time. The threads appeared before her inner vision, silver lines stretching outward from this moment, branching into countless possible futures. Some led to bloodshed, to a kingdom torn apart by civil war. Some led to victory for Victor Ravencroft, to darkness and suffering. Some led to Dominic's triumph, but at terrible cost. And one, a single faint thread gleaming with unusual brightness, led somewhere else entirely. A future not built on victory or defeat, but on transformation, on mercy, on the courage to choose a different path than the ones that had led the kingdom to this precipice. Mira focused on that thread, following it forward. She saw herself standing beside Dominic in the great hall facing Victor's messenger. She saw her hands moving in signs that glowed with silver light, her meaning clear to all who watched. She saw the messenger's shock, the council's amazement. And beyond that moment, she glimpsed something more, a child with eyes that shimmered silver and gold, a kingdom healing from ancient wounds, a new way of ruling that balanced strength with compassion. As the vision faded, Morgan entered with a bundle of midnight blue silk draped over her arm. "The king has ordered a gown made for you," she said, "for tomorrow's audience." Mira's eyes widened at the fabric's quality and the silver embroidery along its edges, the mark of the Silverstone line, the symbol of royalty. "He means to present you not just as his ward, but as his chosen," Morgan explained, laying the gown across the bed. "Are you ready for what that means, for how the court will react?" Mira nodded, newfound certainty filling her. The threads of possibility had shown her the path. Tomorrow, when Victor's messenger arrived, she would stand beside her Alpha King, not as a silent shadow, but as the voice of a future that neither Victor nor the old guard could imagine. A future where her silence spoke louder than any words, where her presence changed the very nature of power in Silver Oak. Morgan studied her face, then smiled knowingly. "You've seen it, haven't you, the path ahead?" Mira signed her answer, "Not the whole path, just the next step." "Sometimes that's enough," Morgan said. "The goddess rarely shows us more than we need." As the old healer helped her try on the gown, Mira felt a flutter beneath her ribs, the child moving, responding to her thoughts. 4 months along, too early for most pregnancies to show such awareness. But this was no ordinary child. This was the heir of Silverstone and Pathfinder bloodlines, already attuned to the threads of fate, already reaching out to touch the future that awaited them all. The game had changed indeed. And Mira Mute, Omega Pathfinder Future Queen, was finally ready to play her part. Dawn broke over Silver Oak Castle with the silent grace of new snow. From her chambers in the royal wing, Mira watched the sun paint the mountains gold, casting long shadows across the valley below. Today, Victor's messenger would arrive. Today, she would stand beside Dominic as more than a servant, more than a secret to be guarded. Morgan arrived early, bringing a gown that took Mira's breath away, silver silk embroidered with the Silverstone crest, accented with midnight blue, that matched Dominic's royal colors. It was a queen's garment, unmistakable in its symbolism. "His Majesty had it made in secret," Morgan explained as she helped Mira dress. "He's been planning this longer than you realize." The gown fit perfectly, flowing over her still subtle pregnancy with elegant draping. As Morgan arranged Mira's dark hair in an intricate style adorned with silver pins, the old healer hummed a tune that seemed to make the air itself vibrate with anticipation. "There," Morgan said, stepping back to admire her work. "Now you look the part, but remember, child appearance is just the beginning. Today you must become what the kingdom needs, what the king believes you already are." Mira touched the scarred tissue at her throat, anxiety building despite her resolve. How could she stand before the court, before Victor's messenger, when she couldn't even speak to defend herself? Reading her doubt, Morgan took Mira's hands in her weathered ones. The goddess visited you in dreams, didn't she? She gave you a gift. Mira nodded, surprised that Morgan knew. I've served pathfinders before you, child. I know Diana's touch when I see it. The old woman smiled. Trust the gift. When the moment comes, you'll know what to do. A knock at the door announced Dominic's arrival. He entered resplendent in formal regalia, a midnight blue tunic with silver embroidery that matched Mira's gown, a ceremonial sword at his hip, the crown of silver oak resting on his brow. He stopped short at the sight of her, his expression transforming from kingly composure to raw admiration. Mira, he breathed the single word carrying volumes of meaning. She turned in place, allowing him to see the full effect of the gown, her hands asking silently if he approved. You're beautiful, Dominic said, crossing the room to take her hands in his. More than beautiful. You look like what you are, a queen. His eyes darkened as he added, my queen. His confidence bolstered her courage. She squeezed his fingers, attempting to communicate her determination through touch alone. The great hall is prepared, Dominic continued. The full council will be present, along with representatives from every noble house in Silver Oak. Victor's messenger arrives within the hour. His jaw tightened. Are you ready? Mira nodded, though her heart pounded against her ribs like a trapped bird. Ready or not, the moment had come to step from shadows into light. The great hall of Silver Oak Castle had been transformed for the occasion. Banners bearing the Silverstone crest hung from ancient rafters. Fires blazed in massive hearths, warming the cavernous space. The hall was packed with nobility council members and royal guards standing at attention along the walls. Dominic entered first, his presence commanding instant silence as he strode toward the dais where the black throne waited. Mira followed 3 steps behind, feeling the weight of hundreds of eyes upon her. Whispers rippled through the crowd like wind through dry leaves. The mute Omega servant, dressed as royalty, walking the path normally reserved for queens and royal consorts. She kept her gaze forward, her posture straight, channeling every lesson in dignity she'd learned during 20 years of observation from the sidelines of power. Diana's words echoed in her mind. Your silence is the loudest truth this kingdom has ever heard. When they reached the dais, Dominic took his place on the throne. Then, breaking centuries of protocol, he gestured for Mira to stand at his right hand rather than kneeling or standing below the dais as tradition dictated. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, until Dominic raised a hand for silence. My people, he began, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall. Today, we receive a messenger from Victor Ravencroft under flag of truce. Before he arrives, there is something you must know. He stood, moving to stand beside Mira. For too long, Silver Oak has been ruled by old ways, by traditions that separate rather than unite. My father believed strength came from dominance. My grandfather believed it came from fear. Dominic took Mira's hand, raising it so all could see their joined fingers. I have learned a different truth. True strength comes from choosing mercy when cruelty would be easier. It comes from recognizing value where others see only weakness. It comes from protecting what is mine. The hall had gone completely silent, every ear straining to catch the king's words. This woman beside me is Mira, a pathfinder, gifted with the ability to read the threads of fate itself. For 20 years she has served in this castle, voiceless, because Victor Ravencroft burned her throat when she was a child, trying to extinguish her gift. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Many had heard rumors of a pathfinder in the castle, but few knew the truth of her muteness or its cause. She carries a child of royal blood, Dominic continued, his voice softening. My brother Nicholas's child, conceived before his death in the Eastern Campaign. More gasps, louder this time. The revelation of a royal heir, even one conceived out of wedlock, was momentous news. Victor Ravencroft fears this child because it combines 2 powerful bloodlines, Silverstone and Pathfinder. He has already sent assassins to abduct Mira to steal the heir she carries. He now spreads rumors to turn you against her, claiming witchcraft and deception. Dominic's expression hardened. I tell you now, before his messenger arrives, that I have chosen Mira as my future queen. The child she carries will be legitimized, acknowledged heir to the Silverstone throne. This is not negotiable. This is not subject to Victor's approval or anyone else's. The pronouncement hung in the air like thunder. Some faces in the crowd registered shock. Others, outrage. Still others, calculation, as political alignments shifted in real time. But before anyone could react further, the massive doors at the end of the hall swung open. Victor Ravencroft's messenger, Lord Frederick Stone, announced the herald. The man who entered carried himself with the arrogance of old nobility. Tall and lean with graying temples and cold eyes, he bore a striking resemblance to Victor himself, likely a cousin or distant relation. He approached the dais with measured steps, carrying a white flag of truce in one hand and what appeared to be a scroll in the other. When he reached the appropriate distance, Lord Frederick bowed just deeply enough to satisfy a protocol call without conveying true respect. "Your Majesty," he said, straightening, "I bring words of peace from Lord Victor Ravencroft." Dominic's expression remained neutral. "Speak them." Frederick's wen flicked to Mira, lingering on her throat before returning to the king. "Lord Ravencroft proposes an end to hostilities through alliance. He offers his niece, Lady Helena, as bride to secure the Silverstone succession with a proper union." "Proper union," Dominic repeated, his voice dangerously soft. "Explain what you mean by that, Lord Frederick." The messenger's smile didn't reach his eyes. "My lord merely observes that a king should have a queen who can speak for him, who brings political advantage rather than—" He paused, gaze returning to Mira. "Disadvantage." Murmurs rippled through the hall. Dominic's scent spiked with anger, but his voice remained controlled. "Continue with Victor's proposal." "In exchange for this advantageous union," Frederick continued, "Lord Ravencroft asks only that the Pathfinder woman and her child be placed under his guardianship in the Eastern Territories. For their own protection, of course." "Of course," Dominic said, sarcasm evident. "And what else does Lord Ravencroft demand in this peace proposal?" Frederick unrolled the scroll. "Merely that you acknowledge certain errors in judgment, that the Eastern Territories be granted autonomy under Lord Ravencroft's governance, that trade routes be renegotiated in favor of Eastern merchants." With each item, the proposal revealed itself for what it truly was: not peace, but calculated humiliation. Victor didn't expect Dominic to accept these terms. He wanted the rejection to come before witnesses, giving him justification for the war he'd already decided to wage. "Is that all, Martino?" Dominic asked when Frederick finally finished. "It is, Your Majesty." The messenger rolled the scroll closed. "And if I refuse—" Frederick's smile widened slightly. "Then Lord Ravencroft regrets that he cannot guarantee the safety of trade caravans through Coldridge Pass, nor can he prevent certain dissatisfied elements within Silver Oak from expressing their displeasure with a king who places a mute omega above proper royal succession." The threat hung in the air, blatant despite its diplomatic phrasing. Victor was threatening civil war, claiming supporters within Silver Oak itself. Dominic rose from his throne, his presence filling the hall like a gathering storm. "You deliver threats under flag of truce, Lord Frederick. That alone is cause for offense." "I merely convey my lord's words," Frederick replied smoothly. "The choice is yours, Your Majesty. Proper alliance or unnecessary conflict." Mira felt the moment approaching, the crossroads Diana had shown her in her vision. She stepped forward, drawing all eyes to her movement. "The Omega wishes to speak," Frederick asked mockingly. "Oh, wait, she can't." Dominic started to respond, anger evident in every line of his body, but Mira touched his arm silently, asking him to wait. Then she raised her hands and began to sign. As her fingers moved through the air, something miraculous happened. Silver light traced each gesture, leaving luminous trails that transformed her signs into visible language that all could understand. Diana's gift manifested just as promised. "I speak, though not with voice. I was taken. I was broken. I was given no choice. But I stand here now, and I choose mercy. I choose love. I choose this king. And if that means this kingdom must face its fear, then so be it." The words hung in the air, glowing with silvery light that gradually faded like morning mist. The hall had gone utterly silent, every face frozen in astonishment. Frederick recovered first, his expression hardening into disgust. "Pathfinder tricks," he spat. "This is exactly what Lord Ravencroft warned against: unnatural influence over the throne." "Is it unnatural to choose compassion over cruelty?" Dominic countered. "Is it unnatural to value someone for their strength of spirit rather than their bloodline or political connections?" He turned to address the entire hall. "For generations, the Silverstone line has ruled through force, through fear, through rigid adherence to traditions that separate Alpha from Omega, noble from common, voice from voiceless. Where has it led us? To rebellion, to division, to endless cycles of violence. Dominic took Mira's hand again. I choose a different path, not because a pathfinder has bewitched me, but because I have seen firsthand the cost of the old ways. I watched my father die bitter and alone, hated by half his kingdom. I watched my brother become a monster because he believed his royal blood entitled him to take whatever he wanted. His voice softened, and I watched this woman survive horrors that would have broken lesser souls. I watched her communicate without words, rid people, and situations with more clarity than those with voices. I watched her touch my scar and see the wound beneath the wound. He faced Frederick again, his decision evident in his stance. Tell Lord Ravencroft that I reject his proposal in its entirety. Tell him that Mira will be my queen and her child will be my heir. Tell him that if he wants war, he will find me ready but not eager. Frederick's face flushed with anger. You condemn the kingdom to bloodshed for a mute Omega witch and her bastard child. The nobility will never accept this madness. This is madness, a voice shouted from the crowd as if on cue. Lord Brecken, the guard captain, who had nearly executed Mira, pushed his way forward. You dilute the bloodline with Pathfinder magic. You legitimize a bastard as heir. You prove yourself unfit to rule. Others joined in, voices rising in protest. It was happening just as Victor had planned, division from within, stoked by planted agitators. Dominic's guards moved closer to the throne, hands on sword hilts, as the hall descended toward chaos. Mira felt something shift inside her, a surge of power unlike anything she'd experienced before. The child within her seemed to respond to the danger, the silver luminescence spreading across her skin in waves. She stepped forward, hands raised, and the light emanating from her grew so bright that the hall fell silent once more. Again her hands moved, forming signs that left trails of silver in the air. I have seen the threads of many futures. Some lead to war, some lead to peace. Most lead to something in between, a kingdom learning to evolve, a people learning that strength isn't about dominance. She turned to face Lord Brecken and those who had joined his protest. You fear what you do not understand. You believe power comes only from subjugation, from keeping others beneath you. But true power comes from lifting others up, from finding strength in diversity rather than sameness. Her hands formed new signs, these directed at Frederick. Tell Victor Ravencroft that I remember his face as he burned my voice away. Tell him I remember the village he destroyed, the parents he murdered. Tell him I remember everything, and still I choose mercy over vengeance. That is not weakness. That is the hardest strength of all. The silver light faded and Mira swayed slightly, drained by the effort. Dominic steadied her with a gentle hand at her elbow, his eyes filled with pride and concern. Frederick's composure had cracked, replaced by naked hostility. This changes nothing, he snarled. Victor Ravencroft will not be denied. If you will not give him the Pathfinder and her child willingly, he will take them by force. He can try, Dominic replied, his voice deadly calm. Now leave my hall, Lord Frederick. Your flag of truce protects you only until you reach the border. As the messenger departed, flanked by guards to ensure his safe passage, the hall erupted in conversation. Lord Brecken and his supporters are huddled in angry consultation. Others approached the dais, pledging loyalty to the king and his chosen queen. Most simply watched and waited, unwilling to commit until they saw which way the political winds would blow. That went exactly as expected, Dominic murmured to Mira as they left the dais. Victor never wanted peace. He wanted a public rejection to justify the war he's already planning. Mira nodded, her hands forming a question. What now? Now we prepare, Dominic said grimly. Victor will move quickly, hoping to capitalize on internal division. He glanced at Lord Brecken, who was still holding court among his supporters. We have enemies, within as well as without. Morgan appeared at their side, her ancient eyes gleaming with excitement. The Pathfinder signs, she whispered. Diana's gift. It's been centuries since such a thing was seen in Silver Oak. Will it happen again? Dominic asked. When needed, Morgan replied cryptically. The goddess doesn't waste miracles on the unnecessary. They returned to the royal wing, where Dominic immediately called for his war council. Maps were spread across tables, messengers dispatched to loyal nobles throughout the kingdom, scouts sent to monitor the eastern border. The machinery of war ground into motion with practiced efficiency. Through it all, Mira remained at Dominic's side, no longer hidden away, but fully engaged in planning and strategy. Her Pathfinder gift proved invaluable, allowing her to read the likeliest outcomes of various tactical decisions. With her hand signing and Morgan translating, she helped identify the safest routes for evacuating villages that might lie in Victor's path, the best positions for defensive forces, the most vulnerable points in the kingdom's defenses. Days passed in a blur of preparation. Victor's forces were reportedly moving toward the border, but hadn't yet crossed into Silverstone territory. Inside the castle, tension mounted. Lord Brecken and several other nobles had departed suddenly in the night, presumably to join Victor's rebellion. Others who had wavered now pledged firm loyalty to Dominic, impressed by Mira's display of Pathfinder power in the Great Hall. Then a week after Frederick's visit, everything changed. Mira woke in the night gasping with pain. The child within her was moving violently, and silver light pulsed beneath her skin, in waves that matched the contractions racking her body. Dominic, she tried to call, but only a strangled sound emerged from her damaged throat. She struggled from the bed, stumbling toward the door that connected their chambers, but another contraction dropped her to her knees before she could reach it. It was too early. 4 months too early for the child to come. Something was wrong. The door flew open and Dominic rushed to her side, face tight with concern. "Mira, what's happening?" She gestured frantically to her stomach where the silver light had grown so bright it shone through her nightdress. Dominic's eyes widened in alarm. He gathered her into his arms and carried her to the bed, then bellowed for guards. "Get Morgan. Now tell her it's the baby." While they waited for the healer, Dominic held Mira's hand, his thumb stroking her palm in soothing circles. "Breathe," he murmured. "Just breathe. Morgan will be here soon." The pain receded slightly, allowing Mira to sign a question. "Too early." "Yes," Dominic agreed, not hiding his worry. "Far too early. But Pathfinder pregnancies are different," Morgan says. "The children develop according to their own timeline." Morgan arrived in a flurry of robes and herb-scented pouches, her face grave as she examined Mira. Her weathered hands moved over the glowing abdomen, not quite touching fingers, tracing the patterns of light that rippled beneath the skin. "It's not labor," she announced finally. "Not yet, but the child is awakening, becoming aware." Dominic frowned. "Aware? It's barely past 4 months." "A normal child, yes," Morgan agreed, "but this is no normal child. This is a Pathfinder heir of the Silverstone bloodline, the first in centuries." She turned to Mira. "The child senses danger. It's responding to threat." As if to confirm her words, the silver light pulsed more intensely, and Mira gasped as another wave of pain washed over her. "What danger?" Dominic demanded. "Victor's forces haven't moved." Morgan's expression grew more troubled. "Not from outside the castle," she said quietly, "from within." Before Dominic could question her further, the chamber doors burst open. General Kale stumbled in, blood streaming from a wound in his side. "Treachery," he gasped, collapsing to his knees. "Lord Brecken returned with mercenaries. Hidden entrance in the North Tower." Dominic was on his feet instantly, reaching for the sword he kept by the bedside. "How many?" "At least 50, Kale managed. "They're after the Pathfinder." The general slumped forward, unconscious from blood loss. Morgan moved to his side, already pulling bandages and herbs from her pouches. "I'll tend to him," she told Dominic. "You need to get Mira to safety." Dominic hesitated, torn between his duty as king to defend his castle and his need to protect Mira and their unborn child. Where if they've taken the North Tower, they control the main escape route. "The old passages," Morgan said, "the ones your grandfather sealed during the last Pathfinder purge, behind the tapestry in the Queen's dressing room." Dominic's eyes widened in recognition. "You're certain they still exist?" "I'm certain," Morgan replied. "Now go. I'll do what I can to slow them down." As Dominic helped Mira to her feet, Morgan caught his arm. "The child is trying to protect itself, to protect her. The pain she feels is the awakening of its power. It will pass, but she'll be weakened." Dominic nodded grimly, then swept Mira into his arms, carrying her through the Queen's chambers to a dressing room she'd barely explored since moving to the royal wing. A massive tapestry depicting a hunting scene covered one wall. Dominic shifted Mira to one arm long enough to pull the heavy fabric aside, revealing ancient stonework and what appeared to be a seamless wall. "My grandfather showed me once," he murmured, running his free hand along the stones. "Said a king should always have a way out that no one else knows." His fingers found what they sought, a slight depression that yielded to pressure. A section of wall swung inward with a groan of centuries-old hinges, revealing a narrow passage beyond. Dominic carried Mira into the darkness, kicking the hidden door closed behind them. The passage was pitch black for several heartbeats until the silver luminescence beneath Mira's skin brightened, providing enough light to see by. The tunnel stretched ahead, descending into the earth beneath the castle. These passages were built when Silver Oak was founded, Dominic explained as he carried her downward. A secret escape route for the royal family in case of siege. They lead beyond the castle walls out to the forest. Mira signed a question against his chest, her movements limited by their position, but still understandable to him after weeks of practice. What about your people? Kale will organize the defense, Dominic replied, though doubt shadowed his voice. I can't protect anyone if I'm dead, and Victor wants you and the child more than he wants me. The passage leveled out, branching in several directions. Dominic took the leftmost path without hesitation, moving with surprising speed, despite carrying Mira and navigating by the faint silver light emanating from her skin. Almost there, he murmured, as the passage began to slope upward again. There's a hidden exit in a hollow oak about half a mile from the castle walls. From there we can reach a hunting lodge where loyal guards will meet us. The sound of pursuit cut him off, boots on stone, voices echoing through the passages behind them. Lord Brecken's mercenaries had found the secret tunnel. Dominic increased his pace, but Mira could feel his arms trembling with the effort of carrying her so far. She tapped his chest, signing that she could walk. No, he said firmly. You're in no condition, and we need to move faster than you can manage right now. Hold tight, my queen. I will not let them take what's mine. The exit came into view ahead, a circular wooden door set into the roof of the passage, presumably opening into the hollow tree Dominic had mentioned. He set Mira down just long enough to push against the door, which swung upward with surprising ease. Cold night air rushed in along with the scent of pine and snow. Dominic lifted Mira through the opening, then pulled himself up after her. They emerged inside a massive oak, its trunk hollowed by age, but still living, its branches spreading overhead like protective arms. Through gaps in the bark, Mira could see the castle in the distance, lights blazing from every window. No sounds of battle reached them yet, but the night was young. Brecken's attack had only just begun. Dominic helped her from the hollow tree, supporting her weight as they moved deeper into the forest. The silver glow beneath her skin had dimmed somewhat, and the pain had receded to a dull ache, but she still felt weak, drained by whatever power the child had awakened. There's a hunting lodge about 3 miles from here, Dominic said as they picked their way through snow-covered underbrush. We can rest there, regroup. The sound of horses brought them up short. Dominic pushed Mira behind him, drawing his sword as mounted figures emerged from the trees ahead. For a moment, Mira thought Brecken's men had somehow gotten ahead of them. Then she recognized the lead rider. Victor Ravencroft sat astride a massive black stallion, his copper-streaked hair gleaming in the moonlight. He looked barely older than when he'd burned her voice away 20 years ago. Still handsome in a cold, predatory way, still radiating the arrogant certainty that had defined him even then. Dominic Silverstone, Victor called, his voice carrying the same cultured tones as his messengers. How kind of you to deliver the Pathfinder directly to me. Dominic raised his sword. You'll have to go through me to get to her, Victor. Gladly, Victor replied with a smile that never reached his eyes. He gestured to the dozen mounted warriors surrounding him. Though it seems a waste of a royal bloodline, your father and I were cousins after all. My father was a tyrant, Dominic said flatly. It seems the family trait passed to you instead of me. Victor's smile vanished. Your father understood power. He understood that some bloodlines are meant to rule and others to serve. He understood that abominations like Pathfinder human hybrids threaten the natural order. His gaze shifted to Mira standing behind Dominic. Hello, little one, he said, his voice mockingly gentle. You've grown since I last saw you, still silent, I hope. That was my gift to you, freedom from the burden of speech. Dominic moved to block Victor's view of her. You're surrounded by royal forces, Victor. Brecken's attack on the castle has already failed. Surrender now, and I might show you the mercy you never showed others. It was a bluff, and all of them knew it. No royal forces had followed them into the forest. Brecken's attack might well be succeeding at this very moment. Victor laughed. Always the idealist. It's almost admirable if it weren't so pathetically naive. He dismounted, drawing his own sword. I'll make you a counter-offer. Surrender the Pathfinder and her abomination, and I'll let you live out your days in comfortable exile. Never, Dominic replied. She is mine to protect, and I will die before I let you touch her again. Then we do this the traditional way, way, Victor said, assuming a fighting stance. Alpha against Alpha for the right to claim the Omega. Mira wanted to scream at the reduction of her existence to a prize to be won between warring men. But even if her voice hadn't been burned away, the old laws of combat would have proceeded regardless. When two alphas fought for an Omega, no interference was permitted. The forest clearing became a makeshift arena, Victor's men forming a circle around the combatants. Moonlight filtered through bare branches, casting dappled shadows across the snow. Dominic and Victor circled each other, swords gleaming silver in the cold light. Victor attacked first, his blade a blur of motion. Dominic parried the impact, sending shockwaves through both blades. They were evenly matched in skill, but Victor was fresh, while Dominic had spent hours carrying Mira through underground passages. The fight was brutal, primal, two alpha wolves battling for dominance, as they had since time immemorial. Blade met blade, bodies twisted and lunged, feet carved patterns in the snow. First blood went to Victor, a shallow cut across Dominic's forearm. Second to Dominic, slicing Victor's cheek. As the fight wore on, Dominic's fatigue became evident. His reactions slowed as parries came later and later. Victor pressed his advantage, driving Dominic backward until the Alpha King tripped over an exposed root and fell hard onto his back. Victor's blade flashed down and Dominic barely rolled aside in time. You fight well, Victor acknowledged, breathing hard as Dominic regained his footing. But you've spent too long playing politician cousin, too long showing mercy when strength was required. He lunged again, and this time his blade found its mark, slipping past Dominic's guard to pierce his side. Not a killing blow, but serious enough to draw a grunt of pain from the Alpha King. Yield, Victor demanded. Yield, and I'll make it quick. Dominic's response was another attack fueled by desperation more than strength. Victor parried easily, then countered with a strike that sent Dominic's sword flying from his grip. The Alpha King fell to his knees, unarmed, bleeding from multiple wounds. Victor stood over him, blade at his throat. Any last words, cousin? Any final wisdom about the virtues of mercy? Mira couldn't bear it anymore. Whatever the ancient laws dictated, she wouldn't stand by and watch Dominic die. She stepped forward, the silver luminescence beneath her skin flaring with renewed intensity. Her hands began to move, forming signs that left trails of light in the night air. Stop. This is not the way. There has been enough bloodshed. Victor stared at the glowing words, momentarily transfixed. The Pathfinder speaks, he murmured. How fascinating. Take me, she signed, the silver light of her gestures illuminating the clearing. But spare him. Spare the king who showed mercy when others demanded blood. Mira, no, Dominic gasped, trying to rise despite his wounds. Victor considered, head tilted like a predator assessing prey. A noble sacrifice, but unnecessary. He returned his attention to Dominic. I have a better idea. I'll take you both. The king as my prisoner, a symbol of my victory. The Pathfinder as my prize, and her child as my ward raised to serve me, to read the threads of fate at my command. He pressed his blade harder against Dominic's throat, drawing a thin line of blood. Kneel to me, cousin. Acknowledge me as your better, and you may yet live to see your precious Omega give birth. The child within Mira's womb chose that moment to make its presence known. Silver light exploded outward from her body in a shock wave that knocked Victor and his men backward. The horses reared in panic, throwing several riders. Trees around the clearing bent as if in a strong wind, their branches swaying despite the still night and air. In the center of it all stood Mira, her body glowing like a small sun, her hands moving in signs that no longer merely left trails of light, but seemed to reshape reality itself. The silver luminescence spread outward from her in pulsing waves, transforming the clearing into a space between worlds. You will not touch him. You will not touch this child. You have taken enough from me, my voice, my parents, my village. You will take nothing more. The silver light coalesced around Victor, lifting him from the ground. His sword fell from nerveless fingers as he struggled against an invisible force. The men around the clearing backed away, some fleeing into the darkness, others dropping to their knees in terror or awe. "What is this?" Victor gasped, fear replacing arrogance in his eyes. "What are you doing?" Mira approached him, her steps sure despite her earlier weakness. Her hands formed new signs, each movement precise and deliberate. "I could kill you. I could unmake you thread by thread. But I choose what Dominic taught me, that mercy isn't weakness. It's the hardest strength of all." She looked to where Dominic knelt, watching with awe and concern mingling on his face. Their eyes met across the clearing, and understanding passed between them without need for words or signs. The light surrounding Victor intensified, then contracted, wrapping around him like a cocoon. When it faded, he stood transformed, not physically, but something fundamental had changed. The cold arrogance was gone from his eyes, replaced by confusion, by dawning horror, at memories newly unfettered from whatever justifications had protected his conscience. "What have you done to me?" he whispered, his voice breaking. "I can feel everything. Their fear, their pain." His eyes widened in horrified recognition. "Your parents, your village, all of them. I can feel what they felt when I—" He fell to his knees, hands clutching his head. "Make it stop," he pleaded. "The voices, so many voices. Those are the cries of the innocent," Mira's signs explained. "The people of my village. The pathfinders your family hunted. All those who suffered because you believed power was your birthright." Victor's men backed away, uncertain what to do now that their leader knelt weeping in the snow. Dominic struggled to his feet, retrieved his sword, and approached cautiously. "Is he—" Dominic began, unsure how to finish the question. "Broken number." Mira signed, "Healing." For the first time in his life, he feels the weight of what he's done. He feels empathy. "What do we do with him now?" Dominic asked, keeping his sword ready, despite his obvious confusion at Victor's transformation. "That is for the king to decide," Mira replied, her hands moving more slowly as fatigue overtook her. "But remember what you taught me, that redemption isn't one moment of transformation. It's 1,000 small choices to believe in something better." The silver light faded from her skin, and Mira swayed on her feet. Dominic caught her before she could fall, supporting her despite his own wounds. "Guards," he called to Victor's abandoned men, "take Lord Ravencroft into custody, gently. He is to be treated as a prisoner of the crown, not harmed." Some of the men hesitated, looking to their broken leader for guidance, but Victor remained on his knees, lost in the horrors of his newly awakened conscience. Eventually they obeyed, helping Victor to his feet and binding his hands with leather straps from their saddles. "The castle," Dominic said to the captain of Victor's guard. "We need to return immediately. Lord Brecken's attack must be stopped." The man nodded, offering horses for the king and his pathfinder. As they rode towards Silver Oak Castle, Mira leaned against Dominic's chest, exhaustion claiming her. The child within her was quiet now, the painful awakening of power settled into a gentle hum beneath her skin. "What you did back there," Dominic murmured against her hair. "I've never seen anything like it." Mira signed weakly against his chest. "The child. It was the child's power, not mine." "Both of you then," Dominic amended, "protecting me, protecting us all." He tightened his arms around her. "My fierce, silent queen, my miracle." They crested a hill and Silver Oak Castle came into view, still standing, no signs of battle visible from the outside. As they rode through the gates, they found chaos, but not the kind they had expected. Lord Brecken and his mercenaries had been captured, their attack foiled before it began. Morgan had raised the alarm and loyal guards had been waiting in ambush. "She knew," Dominic said with dawning understanding. "Morgan knew Brecken would try something tonight. That's why she told us to flee through the secret passages." The old healer approached them in the courtyard, a knowing smile on her face. "I may not be a pathfinder," she said, "but I've lived long enough to recognize treachery when I smell it. Besides, the child warned us both, didn't it?" Mira nodded, one hand touching her abdomen where the silver light had faded to a gentle glow, visible only to those who knew to look for it. The child had sensed the danger, had awakened its powers early to protect them all. "And Victor?" Morgan asked, noting the bound and silent figure being led into the castle. "Changed," Dominic replied. "Mira and the child did something to him, made him feel the consequences of his actions." Morgan's eyebrows rose. The empathic reverse, a rare gift even among pathfinders. She studied Victor with professional interest. "He'll need careful tending." Such a sudden awakening of conscience can break a mind if not properly managed. In the days that followed, order was restored throughout the kingdom. With Victor's capture, the rebel forces in the eastern territories surrendered quickly. Lord Brecon and the other nobles who had supported the rebellion were imprisoned awaiting trial for treason. Victor himself remained in a state of profound shock, overwhelmed by the empathy Mira's Pathfinder gift had awakened in him. Morgan visited him daily, administering herbs to ease his mental suffering while ensuring the lesson took root. "He may recover," she told Dominic and Mira during one of their councils, "but he will never be the same man. The capacity for cruelty has been burned out of him, just as he once burned the voice from our Pathfinder." Poetic justice. Dominic observed his arm around Mira's shoulders as they stood on the balcony overlooking the snow-covered kingdom. "Divine justice," Morgan corrected. Diana's hand is evident in all of this. 5 months later, Mira gave birth to a healthy son, Lucas Silverstone, heir to the throne of Silver Oak. The child came into the world as dawn broke over the mountains, and when he opened his eyes for the first time, they shone neither silver blue like his uncle father's, nor deep brown like his mother's, but a combination silver traced with gold, like starlight passing through honey. The kingdom celebrated for 7 days, nobles and commoners alike, gathering to welcome the Pathfinder prince. Even some who had opposed Mira's elevation to queen found themselves won over by the sight of the infant, whose presence seemed to bring peace to all who beheld him. On the final day of celebration, Dominic and Mira stood before the entire kingdom in the great hall, their son cradled between them. The Alpha King placed his hand over Mira's, where she held the child, and together they presented Lucas to his people. "This child represents our future," Dominic declared. "Born of both Silverstone and Pathfinder bloodlines, he will one day rule with both strength and vision. He will understand that true power comes not from dominance, but from unity, not from silencing voices, but from ensuring all are heard." He turned to Mira, his expression softening. "His mother has taught me that silence can speak louder than any shout. That redemption isn't about forgetting our scars, but about wearing them as proof of survival." Mira handed Lucas to Morgan, then stepped forward. Her hands began to move, and just as on the day of Victor's messenger, silver light traced her gestures, making her signs visible to all. "I was silent for 20 years. Silent but never voiceless. I watched and learned and survived. Now I stand before you as your queen, not because I married your king, but because I earned the right through strength you couldn't see." She turned to Dominic, her eyes filled with the emotion words could never fully express. "This king showed me mercy when others would have shown the axe. He saw value where others saw only weakness. He taught me that love isn't about possession, but about choice, the daily choice to be better than we were yesterday." She returned her attention to the assembled kingdom. "Our son will grow in a different world than the one that shaped us. A world where alphas and omegas stand as equals, where those without voice still have something worth saying, where mercy isn't mistaken for weakness, but recognized as the hardest strength of all." 5 years passed. The kingdom of Silver Oak flourished under Dominic and Mira's joint rule. The old divisions between Alpha and Omega, noble and common, began to blur as new laws established more equitable governance. Victor Ravencroft, transformed by his experience, eventually became one of their strongest supporters, dedicating his remaining years to rebuilding the Eastern territories he had once sought to separate. Young Lucas grew into a remarkable child, his Pathfinder abilities manifesting early under Morgan's careful guidance. By the age of 5, he could read the threads of fate with more clarity than any Pathfinder in recorded history, using his gift not for personal gain, but to help others navigate difficult choices. Mira's voice never fully returned, but she no longer needed it. Her sign language became a common second language throughout the kingdom, taught in schools alongside traditional education. When necessary, she could still call upon Diana's gift to make her signs visible to all, though such displays were reserved for formal occasions. On the 5th anniversary of Lucas's birth, the royal family walked together through the castle gardens. Snow fell gently around them, the first snow of spring, delicate and temporary. Lucas ran ahead, his silver gold eyes bright with joy as he chased snowflakes. "Do you regret it?" Dominic asked softly, his arm around Mira's waist. "Any of it, the hardships, the fighting, the sacrifices?" Mira considered the question. She thought of the dungeons, the chains, the silence, and the pain, the years of being invisible. She thought of the moment Dominic had appeared in that courtyard, the moment everything had changed. No, she signed simply. But it's still hard. Every day is still hard. I know, Dominic said. He took her hand, the matching silver bands on their fingers, catching the winter light. The healing is the hard part. That's what most people don't understand about redemption. It's not one moment of transformation. It's 1,000 small choices to believe in something better. Lucas turned back to them, his young face illuminated by falling snow. Mother, father, look. I can see all the possible futures the snowflakes might take. They're all beautiful. Mira watched their son, with wonder and gratitude that still sometimes overwhelmed her. This child born from violence, raised in love, destined to bridge worlds. She looked at Dominic and he smiled. Not the smile of a king, but the smile of a man who had found redemption, not through grand gestures, but through the daily choice to love and be loved in return. I believe in you, she signed. In us, in what we're building together. Dominic kissed her palm, then her lips, a promise renewed with each passing day. Come, he said, squeezing her hand. Let's go watch the snow with our son. They walked together, three figures moving through the white stillness, a king and a queen and a child born of starlight. Behind them, the castle rose against the winter sky like a promise kept. And ahead of them, the threads of fate shimmered with possibility, showing futures that were earned, not given. Chosen, not mandated. The silence between them was no longer empty. It was full of everything that mattered. Presence, choice, and the stubborn, unbreakable belief that even the most broken people could become whole. Not by forgetting their scars, but by wearing them as proof of survival. In the mountains beyond the castle, wolves sang to the moon. And somewhere in the threads of tomorrow, a new legend was already beginning to form. The story of a voiceless queen who taught a kingdom how to listen, and a king who learned that the greatest strength is knowing when to kneel.